The Minnesota Vikings have quite a QB conundrum with Sam Darnold. How does he relate to Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a really impressive Minnesota Vikings victory. And the one thing that stood out to Kevin O'Connell about this offense taking the next step. Welcome to an 11-2 episode of The Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner, he is producer Dave. Dave, 11-2. It's the day after. How are you feeling about it?
I love it. It's another Victory Monday, and it has been fabulous because the team is playing better and better as we get into December, and that's the perfect time to start peaking. And we're going to get, hopefully, Gilmore and Pace and who else was missing off the defense back in time by the end of the season. Hey, it's a wonderful time of the year.
God bless America. And the interesting thing for the Vikings is they're only going to have 4 games left. 3 of them are indoors. 1 of them is in Seattle. And that Seattle game isn't likely to be cold, but it's also not likely going to be warm. It's probably going to be somewhere around like 40, maybe upwards of 50, because the Pacific Northwest is just kind of in its own little sphere as far as like climate is concerned. So that's going to be an interesting one to kind of keep an eye on. But the Vikings have a really good path here moving forward, and they have 4 games left to make an impact. And they're 11-2, still 1 game behind the Detroit Lions, but they do hold the tiebreaker over the Philadelphia Eagles due to common opponents because the Atlanta Falcons beat the Philadelphia Eagles back in week 2 on Monday Night Football. And that could end up being huge for the Minnesota Vikings here moving forward if they're able to overtake the Detroit Lions, which, let's be real, they should overtake the Detroit Lions. I believe they will overtake the Detroit Lions. I'm going to manifest it beyond reason. But
that means Detroit's got to lose one. Now, they're in prime position to do that. Their defense is beat up. Hopefully this next weekend when they play Buffalo will be pissed after what happened yesterday and put a thumping on them.
Yep. That's my hope. That's my hope, is that they're going to be able to do a lot of those things. And the reason why they're able to do a lot of those things, Dave, is because of Sam Darnold had another banner game. I don't know how it wasn't a perfect passer rating day. Maybe he needed 1 more completion in order to achieve that with the algorithm. I'm not 100% sure how the algorithm works specifically, but it's generic stuff. It's like passing yards and completion percentage and all that stuff. So,
well, while we were watching, I was looking at the ESPN stat monitor, and most of the game he had him at perfect, the 183 point whatever, or whatever the perfect number is, and there at the end it just dropped. Now, not by much, but it dropped. I was wondering what the heck.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of taking a look at some of these numbers, but I want to talk about Sam Darnold in a multitude of ways. And if you've been watching this program for a long time, 1, thank you very, very much. It means a lot. 2, you kind of know where I'm going with this. And it's interesting because we haven't really seen a true QB conundrum like this in a long time, where the bridge guy proves he's a franchise guy. And
David got it. Kneel down. Took that point whatever off.
Yeah. Mullins was the one who took the knees.
Did the kneel down.
Yeah. So it's interesting to kind of look at Darnold, who journeyman guy, third overall pick. You think, okay, this guy's going to be a franchise guy. We thought that about a lot of quarterbacks, and it just never pans out. Trey Lance, I thought the world of. Didn't happen. Really stinks. There were a lot of factors in that. One of them being the poor development, I'd say, by the 49ers, the impatience. Plus, Lance got hurt. Freak accident, breaks his ankle, and is out for the entirety of the year. He's supposed to be the unquestioned guy. And then that's how you get Brock Purdy, and it's just a mess. But in all actuality, if he was really, really good, he still would have been able to beat out Brock Purdy when he came back from that injury. It didn't happen.
Hey,
we thought
Ted Glover was high on Johnny Manziel.
I was not. Manziel was a bozo. And that was even before talking about the off the field stuff. Manziel he's like a YouTube highlight reel quarterback. He didn't really play within an offense. He just kind of did shit and it worked. But in the NFL, only Patrick Mahomes can do shit and it works. Maybe Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. That's about it. And quite frankly, you got to be able to operate within structure. No matter what, operating within structure is still king in the National Football League, even with all these dual threat guys. So you have Darnold. He's finally in a situation that's able to kind of elevate him and take him to the level where he was supposed to be at the whole time. And now you're having this special season. And he culminated it 22 of 28, 347 yards, 5 touchdowns, a passer rating of 157.9, 0.4 away from being a perfect passer rating, and a QBR of 82.4, a PFF grade of over 90, which means, dog, you kicked ass. I'm not the biggest fan of PFF grades as a whole, but sometimes they completely match what you see on the field. Sometimes they don't, because how PFF grades everything isn't going to be how everybody else grades everything. They have certain weights that they put on certain plays and how they're looking at these plays, and that doesn't always equate to what everybody else thinks and how they would equate those. So PFF grades are a data point. They're not gospel, but I think it matched really well here in this space. And I mean, we've talked about PFF grades before. None of this is news for those of you who've been listening to the show a long time, kind of how I feel about them. But it's an interesting data point to look at. Both Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson also have PFF grades over 90. Bada bing, bada boom. And the passing game was tremendous. They were trying to find explosives, and they created a bunch of them. But probably the biggest kind of takeaway for me was Sam Darnold. He's just putting every piece of the puzzle together. He's making smart decisions. He's not panicking in the pocket. He's moving the pocket like a seasoned professional. He's attacking downfield in really intelligent ways, finding pathways, finding holes in the zone, finding passing lanes to be able to get the ball. There's that 3rd and 16. I clipped it, and it'll go out later tonight, where Darnold had gotten sacked the play before. They were trying that double move to Justin Jefferson from the backfield. That close to hitting. That's coming back in the playbook. You're going to want to keep an eye out for that, where it looks like he's running it out from the backfield, and then he takes it upfield. He literally just runs into the corner. Not pass interference. The corner has every right to be there. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just in the way. He wasn't intentionally getting in the way. Jefferson just ran right into him. He was expecting him to kind of break outside a little more. He didn't. He stayed home. And Jefferson ran into him, kind of busted up the play. And Darnold ends up getting sacked after about 7 seconds. That kind of stuff happens. But the next play, he slides in the pocket, creates a wide open passing lane, and hits Jefferson on a 20-yard dig route. Boom. It's just gorgeous stuff. It's consistency. Darnold not panicking in the pocket and trying to find ways to escape. Now, he wasn't always able to escape. Kudos to that pass rush by the Atlanta Falcons. They've been one of the worst units in the National Football League all season. But the last 2 weeks, they have 9 sacks. The previous, 11? They had 10.
Late bloomers.
They kind of figured it out. Yeah, they figured it out. They pieced everything together. They figured out a plan that works, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Now, the Vikings, buddy, you got to figure that out. You got to figure out how to be able to block these poor units, because they're doing well against these really good units. They did great against the Texans. They did great against 49ers. Why are we doing poor against a poor unit? kind of weird that way. Like the pass rush has been poor against poor units too. Like that Rams game couldn't generate any kind of pass rush. And you're playing against a terrible offensive line. But you play against a really good offensive line and you just kick ass. It's a very interesting dichotomy. And then David Rinaldi in the chat points out as well, no turnovers. There was a close call with Sam Darnold, his hand getting hit, but his hand was going forward. That ends up being a big play because it kind of shifts momentum a little bit. And I think it's, having that replay assistance where like you can just get it quickly. I think it's great. I think it's great that they let the play out. You always want to let those play out because if it's a fumble, you want to let the continuation of that play happen. So, like, it's hard to even be mad about that because plays like that have oftentimes just been called incomplete immediately. And then if you call it incomplete immediately, if it's a scoop and score, you get nothing. You get nothing. Remember the game against the Colts, the comeback? Those two Chandon Sullivan scoop and scores wiped off the board because of that exact thing. They goofed down the field, and you can't flippy do it once you go to the review. Because once that whistle's blown, it's over. I think one of the other really big things kind of talking about Sam Darnold's performance is the ball placement and selection of how he was throwing the football. He wasn't putting the ball in harm's way. And he was being really consistent, precise, and attacking with intent. You don't want to be reckless. You don't want to be aggressive to be aggressive. And I wrote about this from the defensive perspective. The Vikings defense is hyper aggressive, but one of the things that makes them so great isn't the fact that they are hyper aggressive. It's that they're always playing in control. That third down at the end of the game where Jonathan Grenard runs out to get Kyler Murray out in the flat because Kyler Murray's scrambling. Kyler Murray kind of slows down to be able to like cut back and use Jonathan Grenard's momentum against him. Grenard stays patient, stays home, and gets the tackle on Murray, only allowing like a 2-yard gain, setting up fourth down. Those little nuanced details have been so key for this team. Being really aggressive, but not being stupid about it. Because you can be over aggressive. You can be, hey, I'm going to be aggressive just to be aggressive. No, you don't want to do that. You need to be calculated and smart about it. And I think that's where Darnold has really taken this next step. He's being intentional, being smart. He's not putting the ball in harm's way. And that is making a humongous difference for the success of this offense. And the fact that they're cooking this way right now, 6 wins in a row, Darnold just had the best game of his career against a relatively solid overall defense. Because remember, they were 5th in EPA per play per coverage snap. Like this defense could cover. They just could not rush the passer. So the fact that they were able to do it against this group, huge. Huge. And to do it with Kirk Cousins coming back, you know how much that game meant to him. He may not have shown it. He may not have talked about it, but you knew. You knew Kirk wanted this one. Probably more than any singular game on the schedule. He wanted this. And we didn't give it to him. Didn't give it to him at all. That rules.
And how he threw the defense under the bus. Minnesota nice style about, hey, I went off and it was tied, and I come back and we're behind. In his press conference.
What's even funnier about that, Dave, is he's completely right. It just comes off like a whiny baby. Dog, you just got stomped. Is it necessarily your fault you guys got into that poor situation? I mean, let's be real. Somewhat your fault. Maybe don't throw an interception right at Josh Metellus when it's 5 guys in coverage and there's all this open space and you throw it right to Metellus. Man, am I glad we don't have to watch him play quarterback for us
anymore.
Oh, thank God. My Falcons friends were like, how have you dealt with this? And I think I've said that on the show. I'm like, well, I dealt with worse. There is worse than mediocre. There's worse than above average. It is Christian Ponder. It is Spurgeon Wynn. It is Joe Webb. No offense to Joe Webb. That guy rules. But let's be real. It's Joe Webb. Very inconsistent. That playoff game was brutal.
What an
but we'll always have that Tuesday night win over the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll always have that.
Well, it's
now
they're just dealing with his ups and downs and the roller coaster. We've dealt with it for 6 years. And yeah, it was tough. Just sympathize with him. Yeah, it's tough.
So let's look at some of the let's look at some of the advanced metrics on the day. Sam Darnold, ready for this? 4 big time throws at a percentage of 13.3% of his throws were rated as big time throws by PFF. 0 turnover worthy plays. An average depth of target of 12.2%. 88% adjusted completion percentage. That would be a 9.4% higher percentage than its actual completion percentage, but I think his CPOE was like 12.2. So there's a little bit of a difference with how PFF is charting it versus how CPOE is calculated, which I believe is all statistical data. 1 pass batted down, of course. 4 sacks and 35 dropbacks. Not great, but you know what? What's really impressive is the ability to unbury yourself from these holes. And the Vikings have done this consistently. There's a sack. Oh, that's okay. Darnold will just throw a 20-yard dig route and get us out of it, which he did. That was the play I talked about a little bit earlier. And yeah, I want to see the sacks come down. Some of that is going to come with offensive line improving. Some of that's going to come from Sam Darnold just being smarter. And he's getting smarter. We're seeing growth week in and week out. I think that's great. I think it's great to see. We're seeing a lot of really impressive things from this football team. And one thing that was really interesting to me was listening to Kevin O'Connell in today's presser talk about, ball tracking. Tracking the ball down the field. Something that really doesn't get talked about nearly enough when it comes to receiver play. So
your camera just went again. I don't know if it's your computer not dealing with it or what it is. But go back. I don't know. Shut it off. Come back in. Whatever.
Well, here, let's do this.
Let's see what in the heck's going on. Whoa, that's
transfer to this. But what I'm trying to do is manipulate the system, and
there you go.
We have done it. Mm-hmm. That's why I went to the laptop cam. This is why when we do YouTube, we invest in really nice equipment, because that camera stinks. This camera, real nice, shows the depth of the room, shows the really nice jerseys, which shout out to my wife. For my birthday, she's framing one of my other jerseys for me, which I'm really excited about. I think we're going to frame Dante.
Like Kirk Cousins. Well, he's got that fixed
really
at least.
Good. I think we're going to frame Dante Culpepper first before Percy Harvin. But both of those suckers are going in the basement, and I'm excited.
Ooh.
I know. But it also means I'm going to have to find a new home for Joe Mauer. Because I don't know if you know this, Dave. I have an autographed picture of Joe Mauer when he was playing high school football.
Ooh. Okay.
The coolest piece of memorabilia I own. The coolest. Because it's Joe Mauer playing at Cretin-Durham Hall. Like, that just rules. And for those of you that don't know, Cretin-Durham Hall is like a football powerhouse in Minnesota. They're a private school. That's why they're a powerhouse. So yeah, that's going to get brought to the store tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. And we're going to go to lunch. Speaking of lunch, Gary, I haven't heard you talk about food in a while. I'm going to need some recipes. What have you been making lately? And it would kind of use that to talk about the A topic of the show, because we talked about the game. We talked about kind of Darnold's growth. But if you remember from this summer, and Dave and I, we talked about this pre-show. I did a show talking about what if Sam Darnold is just really good. And it was one of the few shows we didn't do live, so we didn't have like live banter with the audience about it. But it's starting to manifest itself in a really, really interesting way. The Vikings in 2024 are a mirror image of the 2004 San Diego Chargers. Now, let's kind of paint the picture. 2004, Eli Manning goes first overall to the Chargers. He doesn't want to play in San Diego, gets the trade to New York. Phillip Rivers goes to the Chargers. Okay. This is going to be important. Signs a 6-year deal, $41 million. All right. That is going to be important in this conversation because we're going to talk about money as far as quarterbacks, because the idea of, can the Vikings keep Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy? Well, cap hits are going to be a factor here. So let's kind of break it all down. You have Drew Brees in the building. Yes, Drew Brees is the incumbent quarterback. And through 3 years, Drew Brees had not shown that he can be a franchise quarterback. He had shown some positive ability, some average stuff. No, he just hadn't shown nearly enough to be the guy. So they're like, okay, we're picking fourth overall. We're going to take we're picking first overall, We're going to take the quarterback, end up with Phillip Rivers. So Drew Brees, back in 2004, you don't just start a guy to start a guy. You stay patient. You wait. When they're ready, they go in. There is not nearly as much pressure on a top pick as there is today. First overall pick, that dude better be starting. That's kind of the world we live in. They handed Caleb Williams the keys in Chicago in early May. I think it was after rookie minicamp. They're like, all right, you're the guy. They don't even have a veteran in the room to help him. Like, it's kind of an interesting situation there. So Drew Brees is a starter. He's got one more season to prove that he can be a guy before he hits free agency. Otherwise, he's probably just going to be a journeyman backup his whole career. So what does Brees do? Well, he just does this little thing called make the Pro Bowl. And making the Pro Bowl in 2004, when you have Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, it's an impressive feat. So he makes the Pro Bowl, and now the Chargers have a really interesting conundrum on their hands. Do they franchise tag him? Keep him around? Do they sign him to a multi-year deal and just figure out what to do with Rivers? Or do they just let him walk and be like, you know what, Rivers, you're just going to go? They decide to franchise tag him. And this is where the franchise tag comes into play, because I think the Vikings should consider using the franchise tag on Sam Darnold, and we'll break that down after this discussion, because I think it's a really important one. I wrote about the fact that they should consider the franchise tag from a draft capital perspective, and that got released this morning. So Phillip Rivers making average annual value $6.875 million. The franchise tag was $8.078 million per over the cap. So theoretically, and I was not able to find the exact numbers, their combined cap hits were around $14.953 million. 17.49% of the salary cap. Now, things might have been a little different with how, signing bonuses are and stuff. I'm trying to take an approximation because I don't have the year-by-year data from a site that I trust. Over the Cap doesn't have that. But they do have the overall contract, so I'm going to go average annual value. All right. Well, what we do have is what the 2025 salary cap numbers are. So if you end up doing the same thing that the Chargers did with Drew Brees with Sam Darnold, the franchise tag is projected to be $41.304 million. JJ McCarthy has a cap hit of $4,966,999. That would be a cap hit of 16.98% of the salary cap. So it's 0.51% cheaper than the theoretical number we have with the San Diego Chargers. So, and that's where it's important when you're looking over different decades. You want to look at the salary cap adjustments. You want to look at, hey, they were making this percent of the cap, because that's how you can compare things. I can compare 2004 to 2025 because we have percentages. You take up the same percent. Okay, now you're cooking with gas here. It's around the same percent. So this is theoretically doable. And the Vikings are projected to have $76 million over the cap. It went up because there have been some projections now floating around in the ecosphere. So salary cap at $272.5 million, which is over the cap's current projection. You have a really, really interesting decision. You can franchise tag him, make sure you have him in the building. You don't have to rush JJ McCarthy. Or you can franchise tag him, then let him negotiate with other teams, and then trade him. Get some capital back now instead of the franchise. Instead of the compensatory pick that you would get in 2026. And I think that's an interesting one because the Vikings franchise tag him, it kind of goes against them being a super player-friendly organization. Yeah, the Vikings play hardball and they negotiate contracts hard, just like every front office. But they've intentionally been very player-friendly where you don't do stuff like the franchise tag. And with the culture that they built, would that be a smart decision? That's a whole different conversation. You could argue that it would be a very poor decision as far as PR optics, as far as being one of the best teams in the NFLPA surveys. You could argue it's just a net negative for you. So looking, kind of spinning it all forward, it's an interesting dilemma that the Minnesota Vikings have in front of them. If they believe that JJ McCarthy is the guy, if they believe that he's going to be the savior of the franchise, which by all accounts they do, then you just let Darnold go. But there's this element of you have a guy in the building, in Sam Darnold, who you believe in, who has proven to be a franchise player. It's hard to let that guy walk out the door. And this isn't like a Kirk Cousins level quarterback. He's proving to be above a Kirk Cousins level. And I don't really know what I want to do yet because it's a very complicated answer. Because look at how well Darnold's playing. We now have a 4-game sample size where he has 11 touchdowns, 1 turnover, which is a fumble. And the Vikings are 4-0. They've won 6 in a row. They now have 2 5+ game winning streaks this season. And they're beating everybody. And they just walloped the Atlanta Falcons in the fourth quarter. Just whipped them. So what do you do with that guy? What do you do theoretically with a guy that you already believe is a franchise guy, and you have a guy you drafted you believe is also a franchise guy? You have 2 quarterbacks. Usually the saying is if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. That's why this situation is so rare to have a guy that's 27 who's now coming into his own, proving that he can be a franchise guy. And you have a 21-year-old you just drafted who you also believe has proved he can be a franchise guy by how he's handled things in the building, how he handled things at training camp and the preseason. So what do you do? It's a very complicated question. And I don't even know how exactly I'm going to fall on it because you've seen Darnold play at this level against normal defenses, against teams that are game planning against you, against top flight NFL competition. Everything with JJ McCarthy is a theoretical. Now that theoretical could be really good, but it's a theory. There's nothing proven. There's nothing guaranteed. If you're the Minnesota Vikings, do you want to take the guy who's a little bit more proven in that sense, who's proven it in your building, with your scheme, with your players, in your stadium? Or do you take the theory? I'm not saying it's a simple decision because it's far from it. But Darnold has a proof of concept that JJ McCarthy just doesn't. And that is what makes this thing so much more difficult. Because you drafted McCarthy believing he was the guy, and Darnold was just, hey, let's try and win some games. We're going to keep chugging forward. We're going to put everything we have into you, and we're going to see what happens. The idea was he was playing for somebody else's money. But now that he's playing so well, by the way, his MVP odds went from plus 9,000 to plus 5,000 in 2 weeks on DraftKings. That'll happen when you play this kind of great football. So what do the Vikings do? At what point? And this is a hypothetical question. This is rhetorical because everybody's going to have their own answer. What are the Vikings going to do if he takes them to the Super Bowl? What are they going to do if he just continues on this blistering hot pace and sets team records? Maybe he throws for 40 touchdowns, which has never been done in franchise history. Maybe he can leads this team to a 15-2 record, which 15 wins has only been achieved one time in Minnesota Vikings history, and that was 1998. Also, with a backup quarterback, but Randall Cunningham had a little bit more of a proof of concept than Sam Darnold, being that he thrived with the Philadelphia Eagles for nearly a decade before ending up working out in Las Vegas as a forklift operator when Danny Green's like, hey, come back to the league. I don't know how the Minnesota Vikings are going to handle this. I can't tell you that they should handle it in point A or point B yet because there's so many data points we don't have. But if Sam Darnold wins you the Super Bowl, and if the Vikings win the Super Bowl, it's going to be because of Sam Darnold. It's not a Brad Johnson situation with the Buccaneers. It's not a Trent Dilfer situation with the Ravens where Dilfer got cut and they did not bring him back after the season. This would be he started playing quarterback and he led your team to the Super Bowl. Do you get rid of that? That's going to be the dilemma for the Vikings. And one of the reasons why it's so interesting with the Chargers is because it's kind of the same thing. Guy you didn't believe was going to be a long-term starting quarterback just proved he did. Drew Brees made the Hall of Fame, and I am not going to put it out in the ecosphere that Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy are. But Brees and Rivers are going to make the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Brees is a slam dunk. I think Rivers will be too. May take Rivers a couple more years, but I think he'll get in.
Which one won the Super Bowl, though?
Brees won one. Rivers never got there. But we also there's also this thing where Rivers was a consistent top 5 quarterback in the league. He had a couple years where he was just absolutely incredible, and he consistently kept the Chargers viable. And then he goes to the Colts. They win 11 games, and they were like a couple plays away from winning a playoff game in Buffalo. And when he was on his last leg, I think Phillip Rivers is a no-brainer. But you're right. The Super Bowls, that matters to some voters. And I think it's a little unfair, but I also get it. It's going to be interesting. But the whole point of kind of using that example, it's an absolutely crazy one. But when you have two quarterbacks who are that good, and then all of a sudden you have two quarterbacks in Darnold and McCarthy who are also really good, man, it's awesome. It's a great problem to have, but you got to be able to figure out what the right thing to do is. And quite frankly, Dave, I can't tell you what the right thing is now. It's probably going to be keep McCarthy. But it's good to have all the information. Well, the franchise tag could be an interesting pivot point because of how bad the quarterback class is. It's a bad free agent class. It's a bad draft class. Maybe you could get a team to pay you a first-round pick to get Sam Darnold.
But then again, you get it, are the Vikings treating him right by franchising him? The tag and trade approach. But it's going to be up to Kwesi and KOC. Now, one thing that this has proven is KOC can develop quarterbacks. He did it with Kirk Cousins. He got the best out of Joshua Dobbs. He got the best out of Mullins. He obviously took Sam Darnold, who everybody was calling a bust. And in his first part of his career, he was, for all intents and purposes. And now he's playing absolutely elite football across the league. So, do you go that way? And if you tag him, you're tying up that $42 million. If you don't tag him and let him walk, that's available to sign people like Cam Bynum or Brian Murphy to a next contract, or Trey Smith from the Chiefs for that $20 million plus left guard or right guard we were looking for. An absolute beast. Tying up that $42 million on a tag may hinder the plan, the development of the team, the filling in the roster, the weak spots that they had already, planned for. So it's going to be a tough decision. Now we know Kwesi was the one, we're hearing out this last week, was the one that stopped the re-signing of Kirk Cousins. KOC wanted Kirk. Kirk was a known commodity. He was comfortable with him. He played the offense well. He knew the offense well. And that gives me a whole other benefit of Sam Darnold, because Sam Darnold's picked up the offense in less than a season, where it took Kirk 2. It's going to be tough. I'm just glad we got KOC, no matter who's quarterback, to mentor them and lead them along with the rest of the staff. Hopefully we'll keep most of the rest of the staff after this season. But it's going to be a tough choice. Even if he takes us to the Super Bowl, even if he wins the Super Bowl, it's going to be a tough choice.
It's going to be a really tough choice.
That doesn't take into account the players, how the players feel. Right? They got to love both of them.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good piece of information there, because look, if the locker room's like, no, we want Sam. No offense to JJ, but we want Sam. That's going to play a factor here. And that's something that we can't predict. Now, they love Sam, but do they also know, which I'm sure they do, because Kevin O'Connell seems like a pretty transparent guy behind the scenes, because in front of the scenes, he's just tremendous PR. Like, he's a very well-trained media coach, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But I'm guessing they also know that, hey, McCarthy's the future. Darnold's here for 1 year. Let's get him a big money somewhere else. Well, I hope it might turn where we're cooking with so much gas. We don't want to start over. We want this guy. We want to see if we can do it for one more year. And then guess what? Then maybe it's a situation where you just ball out so much with Darnold, he becomes a long-term guy, and then you have to sell McCarthy, which, look, this is more of an informational kind of talk through it kind of show. This isn't a show about, this episode isn't about creating a concrete opinion, because we can't have one yet. We just can't. What if Darnold wins the MVP? What if he wins the Super Bowl? What if he wins a Super Bowl MVP?
His price keeps going up and up.
These are all interesting factors. That one number I saw floated by, I think it was Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated, 3 years, $110 million. I think that was it. Or it might have been 4 years, $110 million, which 4 years, $110 million would be $27.5 million. 3 years, $110 million would have been $36.66 million. I think both of them are very good numbers. The first one is a little closer to Geno Smith. The second one is between what Baker Mayfield got and what Daniel Jones got. And those are just names. You can determine on your own if you think that you would be willing to pay Sam Darnold that much money. That's an entirely different discussion. But teams are starting to really look at Sam Darnold like, hey, this is a viable guy. Kevin O'Connell is now like the quarterback maker. And you have Daniel Jones on staff who's seeing all this, who's learning, and he might want another shot. And being around Kevin O'Connell could be a humongous benefit to him. And he may be here next year as the backup to JJ McCarthy. It's just, this whole conversation is so interesting. And I just think it needs to be layered with more nuance, which is why we're having it right now. I'm really impressed with how the Vikings have handled everything. I'm really impressed with Sam Darnold. I love where things are right now with the Minnesota Vikings. I think they're in a great, great, great spot. And Dave, we're in an interesting place here. The Vikings feel like they have two quarterbacks. For a while with Kirk Cousins, it didn't feel like they had one.
Yeah, but I think it's because of the coach. I got to give credit to KOC for doing this, because it's been amazing.
KOC, deserves a lot of credit. But at a certain point, how much credit are you giving him, and how much are you then taking away from the quarterback and how they're performing? That's a dynamic and dichotomy that's incredibly difficult to parse out, because you could make the argument that it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. And because it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, he can be great with anything. But if you give him a great talent, then you can elevate things to an entirely different level. Just look at what Andy Reid did with Alex Smith. Alex Smith, above average quarterback, kind of on like the Kirk level, a little bit more conservative than Kirk. And he had a year where I think the Chiefs won 11 games. He didn't throw a single touchdown pass to a wide receiver. And Andy Reid won with that team. They went 13-3 the year that they drafted Patrick Mahomes. Sorry, the year before. And then they traded up to go get him because they realized we're going to need a guy to elevate this offense. We don't have him right now. So you give a great coach and great quarterback mind a great talent, and now you have 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. So you can make an argument that you should give Kevin O'Connell a great talent because it'll take things to another level. And I talked about that with like Justin Jefferson earlier today, because you have Justin Jefferson. Oh, I don't need to invest as much in my receivers because I have an elite one. That's actually why you should invest, because he has so much gravity. Now you have great pass catchers around him to make up for it, to fortify, to continue to stress defenses vertically, horizontally, and doing all kinds of things that way. So maybe you need to give Kevin O'Connell the great talent. They did with Darnold, because nobody denied that Darnold had great talent, great ability. It was about being able to use that on the football field and be able to win football games consistently. Something they just, let's be real, they just didn't do in the first couple stops in his career. They're doing it now. How do the Vikings kind of grow from this? Dave, I don't know. But I'll tell you, I'm really excited to find out the rest of the year. This Vikings team is turning into a good squad. They've got great weapons. Their offensive line needs some work. I think the Dalton Reisner experiment is not going the way they wanted, and they should consider a change. Now, I know I have the preconceived notions per se. Maybe that's not the right verbiage, but that's what I'm using right now with Ed Ingram. I just think Ed Ingram's how his style of play is just better for what this team needs than Dalton Reisner. My opinion. I don't think
it's where somebody suggests move Dalton to the left guard and put an Ingram on the right. Remove Brandel.
Brandel's had a couple like difficult games, but he played so well earlier in the year. I would need to see more bad from him in order to consider taking him out. I just think with Reisner's play style, I just don't think it works, especially in the run game. Oh boy, are there some rough ones.
Mm-hmm.
There are some rough ones, Dave.
But when it comes to JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold, the end is not written. We're at the perfect spot in the book where suddenly there's about to be something changed, something nice, whatever. And I think of Paul Harvey. We'll come back next year with the rest of the story when it's all said and done.
Okay. It's interesting. Dave, I think we're going to end the show here. I think we got a lot of really good stuff. I think we talked about a very interesting conundrum with the Minnesota Vikings and their quarterback situation. I think we're in a really good spot. Vikings are 11-2, and we're going to spend Wednesday talking about the Chicago Bears. The Bears. And we're going to preview that game. Vikings played them just 3 weeks ago, beat them 30-27 in Soldier Field.
Overtime.
I'd expect a bigger victory this time around. And we're going to talk about what's happened with the Bears since then and kind of break things down as far as how their offense and defense have evolved since the Vikings game and how the Vikings have evolved. I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued to kind of see what ends up happening with this Vikings team. We got 4 games left. 4 games. 4 games.
Yep, we're in the final stretch.
Yes, we are. And this Sunday is going to be huge for the Vikings. Remember, the Vikings play Monday. The Vikings are going to have a team where they need the Bills to win. The Bills are also going to come out a little fiery because they lost to the Rams. And the Rams are a really good football team.
Now that
guys,
everybody's back healthy. Yeah.
Hope the Rams don't make the playoffs. Let's just put it that way. And that's the show. Thank you guys so much for joining. We're going to have a Scolders and Spice Tuesday night. Our show Wednesday. I believe another one, a Scolders and Spice, either Thursday or Friday, depending on kind of Sal's schedule. We'll keep you posted on that. 2 Old Bloggers on Saturday. Maybe I'll get some kind of podcast content for Sunday. And then Monday, Real Forno Show will be a preview of the Bears game, a pregame show leading up to kickoff with the Winter Warrior uniforms, as Northfia says in the comments. And we'll have a postgame show. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to have a lot of fun this week.
Yes, we are.
Until the next time we see ya, I'm Tyler. He's Dave. Skol Vikings, everybody.
Skol Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. Skol, everyone!